Imagine wearing a simple mask in your day-to-day activities that could tell you if you have lung or kidney disease and track the progress of your treatment in real time. Sounds a bit far-fetched, right? Like something out of a sci-fi novel? Well, once again, developments in tech and science can exceed our wildest imaginations. Hey, I'm your host Regis, and here on Good News, I'll be updating you on the most recent positive developments from around the world. From making space history to protecting millions of acres of Alaskan wilderness and the creation of the first floating wind farm, here are 7 inspiring stories that'll give you a much-needed boost. We start this episode off with a historic SpaceX mission, with the first ever civilian spacewalk. On the 10th of September, the SpaceX Dragon capsule launched from NASA's Kennedy Space Center, signaling the start of the groundbreaking Polaris Dawn mission, set to orbit the Earth. On board were 4 civilians: Jared Isaacman, the billionaire who financed the mission, former US Air Force pilot Scott Petit, and lead SpaceX engineers Sarah Gillis and Anna Menon. The team made the first bit of history just 15 hours after takeoff, when they reached an altitude of 1,400 kilometers. This is the highest a crewed mission has reached since the Apollo 13 mission 50 years ago. But this wasn't the only record that they would set. They then flew the spacecraft down to 737 kilometers, where they depressurized, exposing themselves to the vacuum of space, and finally unlocked the hatch. Isaacman and Gills stepped out into space, becoming the first non-government astronauts to conduct a spacewalk. I can't imagine how excited and nervous they must have been. During the spacewalk, the astronauts performed spaceship mobility checks in their extravehicular activity suits, known as EVA suits. SpaceX specially designed these for the Polaris Dawn mission as a new type of spacesuit that could potentially become commercially available. During the mission, the crew carried out nearly 40 experiments to increase our knowledge and understanding of human health issues in space.
So right here what you see, this is a butterfly ultrasound device, and it's really neat because it can work with like an iPhone or an iPad or just any sort of like tablet device. So it's really portable and you can take it anywhere, even to space. You're able to actually image all sorts of different pieces of the body and get really good diagnostics through it. So we've been using it for a whole bunch of different experiments, measuring our different veins. We've been measuring our bladder. We've been measuring our kidneys and liver and a lot of different pieces of the body. So it's been really interesting, and we're excited to see what we learn from all the data.
The information they collected will be super helpful in advancing space technology for future commercial space flights and for Elon Musk to move one step closer to his dream of humans living on Mars. Finally, after an incredible 5-day space adventure, the Dragon capsule splashed down off the coast of Florida. Quoting Neil Armstrong, NASA reported that the mission was a giant leap forward for the commercial space industry. From the beginning of one era to the end of another, as the last captive elephant at South African Zoo is released into the wild. The 42-year-old elephant named Charlie was captured in Zimbabwe in 1984 when he was just 2 years old. He became a circus elephant and was cruelly trained to perform tricks in shows. In 2001, he was transferred to Pretoria Zoo, where he's been ever since. But Charlie's ordeal didn't stop after leaving the circus. During his time at the zoo, 3 of his companion elephants died prematurely, as well as his calf, who tragically died at just a few weeks old. Now, elephants are highly intelligent and social animals, so these events would have been devastating for Charlie. Since 2020, he's lived alone as the last elephant in captivity. Animal welfare groups, including Four Paws and EMS Foundation, have been very concerned for his health, seeing his distress at living in captivity and his isolation.
The Four Paws team is involved in Charlie's story since several years already. We were invited to be part of the medical assessment of Charlie. We saw many zoos around the globe so far, and I was expecting to see an elephant that is really depressed and lonely, because we knew already that he's living alone. And we were not surprised to see him really with stereotypical behavior, just swaying his head from one side to another, not having any wish to get in contact with anyone. It was just an elephant without a future. He was not seeing anything positive in his future.
African elephants live up to 70 years on average, so living 30 more years in solitary confinement in the zoo would have been awful. These activists have been pushing for his release into the wild for years, but with little success, so they finally took up Charlie's case with the South African government. After years of fighting for his release, the groups were thrilled when the government recently announced that Charlie would be released into the Shambhala Reserve, home to a thriving population of elephants. The plan is to monitor his progress here before hopefully releasing him into the wild. So far, Charlie seems to be settling in well to his new home, which is honestly great news. What's more, the Pretoria Zoo, after facing intense scrutiny, has decided to permanently close its elephant enclosure, setting a precedent for other zoos to follow. Let's hope more elephants can join Charlie in living out the rest of their lives in the wild where they belong. What a heartwarming story. Speaking of returning to their rightful place, the largest dam removal project in United States history is complete, allowing the Klamath River to run its true course. This momentous occasion is thanks to a decades-long campaign led by indigenous groups to free the river and restore fish populations. So, why were the dams built in the first place, and why did they cause such an outcry? Let's find out. In the early 1900s, 4 dams were built across the Klamath River along the Oregon-California border to generate electricity for the rapidly growing regions. But the construction went ahead without the consent of the local Yurok tribe, also known as the Salmon people, who have lived along the Klamath River for centuries. As their name suggests, the river's iconic salmon population is central to their culture, traditions, and survival.
Our cultures, our communities, and our people have really been devastated by these dams.
You know, these salmon that I saw rotting and dying are my connections to my ancestors, right? We've been on this river, we've been in this space for over 15,000 years, since time immemorial.
Now, the problem is that these dams have altered the natural flow of the river, affecting both water temperature and quality, and severely impacting the life cycle of the salmon and native fish populations, which are essential to this region. Numbers have plummeted, with some species even on the brink of extinction. This explains why the Yurok people and environmental activists have been campaigning for the dam's removal, but it's been an uphill battle for decades, so it was surprising when federal regulators approved a removal plan in 2022. The complex removal project has taken over 2 years to complete, but finally, at the end of August 2021, the last dam was razed to the ground. It was a joyous occasion for the indigenous people, who came together to celebrate this profound moment. The gathered crowd cheered as the Klamath River ran in its original channel for the first time in almost a century, allowing fish populations to swim freely. This huge win means freedom and the start of the healing process for the river and the Yurok people. Now, the focus has turned to restoring the land that is now above ground once more. A colossal task, but a worthy one. Over the last few years, 18 billion seeds have been collected and propagated so that they can be planted in this area. The ecosystem is on the road to recovery, an outcome we love to see, just like with the new smart masks that can successfully analyze our breath to monitor health conditions. Scientists from the California Institute of Technology have developed a groundbreaking piece of tech that can monitor the wearer's breath in real time and detect telltale signs of certain diseases. This could be extremely useful for diagnosing and assessing respiratory conditions like asthma and chronic obstructive pulmonary disease, and for monitoring the effectiveness of treatments. The smart mask can also analyze biomarkers in our breath to monitor conditions like kidney disease. Wow! What makes this smart mask so unique is the real-time element, as it monitors your breath continuously and transmits the results via Bluetooth to your phone. The hassle of having to trek to a clinic to take a breath sample and then wait for the results to come back from the lab can now be avoided altogether. As you can imagine, the medical world is really excited about this development, as being able to assess lung and kidney health continuously and in real time is just game-changing. The cherry on top is that these smart masks are relatively cheap to make, and they'll be accessible for people from all income levels. Going forward, scientists are looking at expanding the biomarkers that the smart mask analyze to monitor even more health conditions. They could also potentially be used in law enforcement, as the device can even detect alcohol levels. The possibilities are endless, and so are those for renewable energy, as the first dynamic green ammonia plant in the world has opened in Denmark. Ammonia, which is normally produced using fossil fuels, is responsible for about 1% of global CO2 emissions. But in this new plant, ammonia can be produced using power from solar panels and wind turbines, making it green energy. By using renewable power, this pioneering green ammonia plant is expected to prevent the emission of a whopping 8,200 tons of CO2 annually. So why is ammonia useful? Ammonia is used to make artificial fertilizers, but you may not realize it can also be used as a fuel. At the moment, hydrogen, made from electricity and water, is seen as a potentially environmentally friendly fuel source, as it doesn't produce CO2 as a byproduct. But the problem is that hydrogen is difficult to store and transport. It also doesn't generate enough energy to be used in energy-intensive industries. But that is where ammonia comes in. Ammonia is created by adding nitrogen to hydrogen. Ammonia contains a lot more energy than hydrogen as well, so it could be a really effective alternative to fossil fuels. It's also much easier to store and distribute as the infrastructure is already in place, and there's very little risk of combustion. Green ammonia could be the way for energy-intensive sectors like heavy transport and shipping to transition to green energy, as well as industries like steel and cement production. These industries are notoriously fossil fuel reliant, so this new development is really exciting and could have a massive impact. The green ammonia plant in Denmark is also dynamic, designed to adapt to the fluctuations in power output common with renewable energy sources. It can reduce or increase production of ammonia depending on the renewable energy supply available. This increases efficiency and means that it won't have to fall back on electricity from the grid when the renewable supply is low. The opening of this facility is a huge milestone in the worldwide green transition. If green ammonia production takes off globally, it'll play a crucial role in reaching net zero and limiting the extraction of fossil fuels. And so will the federal government's decision to maintain protections of 28 million acres of public land in Alaska. These public lands cover an area larger than Iceland and have been under federal protection since 1971, when the Alaska Native Settlement Act was introduced. But in 2021, at the end of the Trump administration, the government signed orders to lift all protections. You might be thinking that not many people would want to live in the Alaskan wilderness anyway, so removing protections wouldn't have a big impact. The issue is that it would allow extractive development activities such as mining and oil and gas drilling to take place. This would seriously threaten wildlife populations and potentially destroy their habitats. What's more, it would remove the federal subsistence priority from millions of acres, which allows native and rural Alaskans to hunt and fish on the land. This is super important in Alaska, as people rely on wild foods here more than anywhere else in the United States. So it's been pretty clear why there's been such public outrage. But when the Biden administration came in after the Trump administration, they put this decision on hold.
And we anticipate that tomorrow, millions more acres will be taken offline, restricted, prohibited from development within the National Petroleum Reserve, an area designated by the federal government decades ago. For what? For petroleum resources. They
consulted Alaskan Native tribes, held meetings with rural and urban groups, and carried out an extensive environmental impact analysis. After a thorough investigation, they found that lifting any of the protections would cause irreparable damage to the wildlife, vegetation, and permafrost in the Alaskan wilderness, and threaten indigenous ways of living. This outcome is better than many expected, and it's a huge relief for Alaskan Native tribes and environmentalists. Now, speaking of better than expected, the world's first semi-submersible floating wind farm has also exceeded expectations. But before we get to that, we quickly wanted to mention that we've launched our very own Good News email newsletter. Every Monday and Friday, you'll receive an engaging email filled with 5 uplifting stories from all around the world. To support us, visit good-news.io or click the first link in the description. It costs just $4.90 a month, and there's also a free preview available. This newsletter is going to help us keep creating and sharing good news content here on YouTube as well. So thank you so much for your support. And now, time for our final story. Located 18 kilometers off the coast of Portugal, the Windfloat Atlantic project is a first-of-a-kind wind farm that supplies clean energy to 25,000 Portuguese households per year. But you all know that wind farms have been around for years now, so How is this one better than the others? To answer this, we need to understand the design a bit more. The turbines are on floating platforms instead of being directly fixed to the ocean floor. Instead, the semi-submerged platforms are anchored to the seafloor using chains. The energy produced travels through a 20-kilometer long cable to the electrical station on the mainland. Now, the advantage of the floating structure is that turbines can be put in much deeper waters. For example, this wind farm is located at a location where the seafloor is about 100 meters deep, whereas normal fixed turbines can only be located at depths of less than 60 meters. Although the ocean depth might not seem like super relevant in determining wind production, those of you who have experience in this field will know that this is actually really important. This is because the floating platforms can be located further out to sea, where winds tend to be stronger and also more consistent. These turbines are also more stable in rough seas thanks to the semi-submerged design. All in all, the turbines can harness the power of the wind more consistently, which increases their efficiency and energy production. The development of these floating wind farms is a big advancement in offshore wind technology, a rapidly growing sector crucial for preventing the depletion of the world's finite resources. This news is really encouraging, and hopefully floating turbines can be introduced in similar sites around the world. Well, that's a wrap for today's episode of Good News. If you liked what you saw, don't forget to subscribe and check out our newsletter. You can try it for free and upgrade to the premium version later. As always, thank you so much for watching, and we'll catch you next time.